phenomenally successful LGBT mental self-help book called Straight Jacket. He's also a playwright, penning the play Blowing Whistles, which explores the pitfalls and problems that many gay people experience, which has been performed in London's West End, Canada, Australia, and the US of A. Matthew was also a former editor of LGBT lifestyle magazine Attitude, having interviewed some serious A-list celebrities during his time there, such as Prince William and Madonna, no less. So let's hope we have a bit of backstage gossip on them a bit later. Matthew, it's a thrill to have you with us. Welcome back to Positive East.
Thank you. Very nice of you to have me. Nice to be back. Although, this is lovely, but it was nice when we were face to face. I remember it very well.
Oh, how things have changed.
I know.
In the world. Well, I hope you're coping with the heat. So, Matthew, can you tell us, what have you been up to since we saw you last?
When did I last see you? Probably about two years ago, maybe 3 years ago. It was quite a while, wasn't it? I suppose mainly I was in that place of promoting Straight Jacket at the time and going around the country and to bookshops and giving lots of talks, and I've been doing quite a lot of that. I do that a lot to companies when it feels like Pride Month in June is like it's like I'm a Christmas elf and it's December. It's the only time I come out and I have anything to do, so go around doing lots of talks in that time. And then I wrote my second book, which is called Pride, which is a big coffee table book about the story of the LGBTQ equality movement that came out last year, kind of in time for the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, just documenting everything that's happened over the last 50 years on our collective journey. So, and then doing more talks, just basically talk until my kind of voice kind of falls out.
So your new book has just been published recently, is that right?
Yeah, last year it came out to coincide with the 50th anniversary, and then it just came out in America this year, and it's been translated into Spanish and Italian and French. So it's been quite exciting. It's been exciting to see that go off in a way. In some ways, it's kind of a bit more kind of palatable to people, that book, because it's just about the history, and it's got lots of nice pictures and things. Whereas Straight Jacket's obviously quite intense and quite tough and doesn't pull any punches. But yeah, it's been an amazing couple of years.
Great. So you mentioned Straight Jacket. Can we talk about that first of all? Because LGBT mental health is what this book is about, and that was really when I personally first became aware of you as a writer and as a person. What inspired you to write the book Straight Jacket?
Well, you have to wave at me if I waffle on too much, because I do waffle sometimes, but it's a long story, really. I mean, I guess I was struggling with my own self-esteem, mental health, drinking too much, lots of compulsive behavior. But I think it goes back further than that. I suppose it's inspired by my entire journey, which I imagine is similar in some ways and not in other ways for lots of us. Just that, I grew up in the 80s. I was born in 1973. And when I was a teenager, my dad was a bus driver and used to bring home the kind of newspapers, tabloid newspapers that people would leave on the bus. And so he'd bring like the Sun and the Mirror and the News of the World. And I would just read, especially from 82, when HIV and AIDS first kind of came into the world, just this kind of hysterical homophobia that was in the press that was really, really nasty. So it was a really confusing time at that time to realize I was gay too, and then kind of reading about gay people in the newspapers that I kind of trusted, because those kind of newspapers, they do kind of like create a whole world. They kind of like the bingo and the celebrities and and they kind of welcome you in, and then suddenly to be being bludgeoned week in, week out, and some of them were really, really horrendous, just so incredibly homophobic, and using HIV and AIDS as a way to kind of bash the Labour Party, which is what I think a lot of it was about, because the Labour Party were starting to become gay friendly. So I just heard all these kind of terrible messages about gay people. So it wasn't a great time to realize you were gay. And then I came out, realized most of that stuff wasn't true. I was kind of, went to a gay youth group and met other gay people for the first time when I was 16, and then came out to the gay scene. But I did start to notice, I had some amazing times and made some amazing friends, but I started to notice this issue with self-esteem, that something wasn't quite right. I knew I had my own issues, but I remember there was a young man I knew that I became friends with, who said to me, you know, can I say naughty words here? I can swear on this. Can people cope with it? I'm sure they can.
As far as I'm concerned.
Okay, great. Well, I'll try and be fairly polite. But this guy used to say to me, I'm just a piece of shit. I'm a piece of shit. I'm definitely going to get HIV. I deserve to get it. And I remember being really shocked by that and really upset to hear someone say something like that. And it just seemed to be that there was a lot of people that didn't think very highly of themselves. And I say it sounds a bit judgmental when I say it, and it's not judgmental at all, because I think I was one of those people, although I wasn't expressing it openly. I was really wrapped up in kind of feeling like I had to be better than everybody, because I think it had all these messages to say that, you know, if you were gay, it was a terrible, terrible thing. So I dealt with that by kind of being trying to be funny and gobby to survive at school, and then coming out and thinking, you know, I went to see Madonna when I was 16. It was the first concert I saw, became completely obsessed with her. And I thought, I want to be the new Madonna. And just kind of being obsessed with kind of getting attention and being a little bit crazy. I mean, I was a young person and a teenager. And but that seemed to be, it wasn't everywhere, because like I say, I had an amazing time. You know, when you come out, it can be so incredible. And you know, going to the first time I ever went to a gay club was Palm Beach in Streatham. Some people will remember that. I have fond memories of it, but the first time I went there, someone was really, really rude and horrible to me, and it was really upsetting because I was really scared, you know, going that first time. And then coming out onto the gay scene as I got older and having relationships. In relationships, I was completely crazy. I mean, I was very possessive, very jealous, very insecure, ruined a few relationships, then fell in love with somebody who had a lot of difficulties himself, and he was drinking too much, cheating all the time. He was just a lot of messiness. And then eventually, kind of in my mid to late 20s, when I moved into London, I just thought, okay, well, kind of if you can't beat them, may as well join them. And I thought if I just kind of sleep around, then maybe I'm not going to get hurt. You know, if I'm just sleeping with people and not having an emotional investment with people, then there's no chance of being cheated on. There's no chance of being hurt. So I was doing that. And it just kind of got a bit out of control. The drink and the compulsive behavior, I didn't feel like I could stop myself. And I was often going to therapists. I actually saw one when I was 21. I was at university, we had a family bereavement, and I remember going to see her then, and she was really lovely. But she said to me by the second session, when I started talking about my sexuality, she said, I don't know anything about gay people. I don't know anything about the issue. And but at the end of the 6 sessions, she thanked me for educating her, which, you know, quite flattering. But, you know, I was 21. I really needed some help. But the same was from, you know, like gay therapists I saw via sexual health clinics who, I mean, there's one guy I mentioned in the book, a younger guy who kind of said, well, you're sleeping around and, you know, just enjoy it. Lots of sex. That's the best thing. You know, that's the best thing about being gay. And I've mythologized that a little bit, but that's essentially what he said. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have sex, because I've had a lot of sex. I still have sex. But it got to the point where it was kind of in control of my life, really. And it felt like it was a problem. And the alcohol too. To cut a long story short, friends of mine were going through similar issues. My friend had an eating disorder. I went on a date with somebody who ended up killing himself years later. When I eventually worked at Attitude quite early on, there was a writer from a different magazine that I had a bit of a crush on, actually. And I never even met him, but I had a crush on him from afar, and he killed himself. I heard from another gay magazine somebody had taken their own life. It just seemed there was a lot of this going around, and I would talk about it to my friends and talk about it to other people, and then talk about it to therapists and people at sexual health clinics and things. And there just was no dialogue about that at all. And I think that it was a context of the gay rights movement. We've been told by everybody, you know, by religion and governments, and of course, and there's places in the world still where it's illegal to be gay, where you can be killed for being gay. We've been told by everybody, it's bad, it's wrong, it's a mental illness, it's this, it's that. And so I think we've reacted to that culturally by, you know, waving a pride banner, and that word pride, the opposite of shame, which was something we all needed. I certainly loved pride, and I really was invested in that. But it didn't leave any space to talk about some of the problems. I think we were in denial culturally about some of the problems. And it wasn't until a really good friend of mine who had an eating disorder went to the doctors, to the GP, and burst into tears and said that he was going to kill himself. And the GP basically suggested this recovery group to him. And eventually I went into recovery in a serious way. And just as I was becoming editor of Attitude, actually, in 2008, so it was a very strange time, and I had my play on in the West End as well at the same time. All these intense things were happening. And I met this therapist who was a gay man who said, well, of course you're screwed up, you're gay. And that was a very confronting thing to say. But then he went on to say it's not your sexuality in itself, it's the fact you've grown up in a society, especially in the 80s and the 90s, which invalidates anybody who's not heterosexual and cisgendered and all the rest of it. And basically talking about the way society shames us. And he gave me a copy of the book Velvet Rage, which was a real eye-opening moment for me to just have a gay person joining the dots and saying, this is why this stuff is happening. And then I just investigated it more. I wrote about it in Attitude in 2010, a big 10-page feature called How to Be Gay and Happy. And everyone at the magazine was a little bit nervous talking about a kind of controversial subject, because the LGBT community weren't talking about mental health, but neither was anybody else. I mean, you can't turn on the TV or radio now without hearing people saying, you know, got to talk about mental health, which is really great. It's a great thing, but it just was so different 10 years ago. And so we were a little bit nervous about publishing it, but we got more letters than we've ever had before, certainly when I was there or since, just saying, oh my God, you got inside my head. We need to talk about this more. And so I've ended up writing Straight Jacket, which is kind of, I would say, a kind of English take on this, or British take on this subject, and maybe taking things a step on. I've got huge respect for The Velvet Rage and Alan Downs, who wrote it, and I'm not a therapist. I would say that very, very much. You know, it's part my story and part what I see around me, and you know, it's not gospel. If people want to disagree, they can. But I think, you know, updating things a bit, talking about Grindr and things which are kind of a bit more modern, and it seems to have helped lots of people, though it is a very intense read. I'm the first person to acknowledge that. Sorry about that. Well, I hope everyone hasn't fallen asleep, but
well, I certainly haven't.
Good.
Can I just ask you about? You mentioned about the Velvet Rage, which has a similar kind of mission in its objective. But you talk about chemsex in Straight Jacket. We see a lot of issues around the LGBT community with chemsex. Can you talk to us about what is it that you believe that creates that sort of addictive craving in predominantly what you postulate is more LGBT people? Yeah,
and gay and bisexual men, essentially, men who have sex with men. I mean, it's not that other people, well, it's really complicated. And when I first wrote that article in Attitude, I broke up into little sections. So we interviewed somebody who had an issue with alcohol, we interviewed somebody who had an issue with compulsive eating, somebody who had an issue with body image, and we interviewed somebody who had a problem with drugs. Now, at that time, I didn't know about crystal meth and G and all of that kind of stuff, and it was still kind of pretty underground. And this guy had a problem with cocaine where he couldn't leave the house for months on end. It was just in his house on benefits, just taking coke and having it posted through the letterbox. And I remember David Stewart, I think, I heard him talking, and I got in contact with him and started talking to him about what was going on out there. Started talking to lots of different friends who were all saying, oh, you can't say that, it's not true. I mean, there were lots of organizations, gay organizations as well, that were very much in denial about that it was happening, you know, saying that, oh, this is just a thing in tiny amounts of people, and it's just in Vauxhall, or it's just in this tiny group. And then I started hearing more and more stories of people overdosing, and that it was a really, really big problem. And it's essentially the theory in my book. I mean, I feel like not only do we not understand mental health very much, and we are talking about mental health now, as I've said, but we're still not really talking about addiction, and we're not talking about the kind of messier side of mental health and the way it manifests, because it's all very well to say, oh, I didn't feel very good and I felt depressed, and that's a really serious, debilitating problem for many, many people. But it's a bit more difficult for the media and for our culture to then talk about addiction and what happens with addiction when people start doing really, difficult, getting into difficult places and doing things which are not great for them. So the theory basically is that when you're young, there's this kind of way that parents kind of use shame in a way. In some people say this isn't the case. The kind of disagreement about it, but some people believe that you can use shame in a healthy way. So if when a child is, I don't know, 4 or 5, is going to go and put his hand in the fire, the parent will go, don't do that, and express a kind of shame to them, to say to them, you can't go near the fire, don't put your hand in the fire because you'll burn your hand. And so the child might do it again or a third time. And if that happens every time, it starts to associate going near the fire is a bad thing, because the parent, of which we have this immense, incredible bond when we're children and babies. I mean, when you're a kid, your parents are everything. They're like God, aren't they? They're like the king or the queen or whatever you have there. And so you believe everything they say. So eventually, after a while, when it works, the child will learn boundaries. Don't do this. Don't go, don't tell your grandmother that she's got a big nose because you get told off. Don't go near the fire. Don't steal biscuits, etc., etc., etc. But the idea is that with us, when we start doing things which are considered not normal by society. So for instance, for me, I wasn't interested in playing football. I was obsessed with Kylie Minogue and, Starlight Express and musicals. I was such a cliche. I mean, I used to sing the Wizard of Oz songs for my uncle when I was like 5 or 6. And it wasn't, it's not to blame it all on parents, because actually my mum and dad encouraged me to sing the Wizard of Oz songs. Everyone thought it was funny. But when I started getting those messages from school, from girls at school, why are you acting, not like a boy? From boys at school, kind of being aggressive because I wasn't able to play football and wasn't as macho and so on. We start getting all of those messages, and this doesn't happen to everybody, but I think it does happen to a lot of us. When you start receiving those messages from people, it's like that shaming process is working, but it's working in a dysfunctional way because people are telling you, shaming you, but it's not for something you were doing, like taking a biscuit or going near the fire. It's for something you are. I didn't even understand I was doing those things. It just came completely naturally to me. So how could I stop it? I couldn't stop it. So I carried on just being myself. And then eventually, if that happens enough, you end up not being shamed for something you've done. You end up feeling shamed for what you are. And that's when problems begin. There's a study in California. It's called the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience study, where they studied kids growing up over decades and decades and decades. It's still ongoing now. It's an incredible study. And they basically looked at how many adverse childhood experiences they had and how that impacted their lives when they were adults, to see if there was a correlation. And they would class adverse childhood experiences as abbereavement, parents being divorced, being physically abused or being sexually abused, a whole range of different things, seeing a disaster. I think some of the kids who witnessed 9/11 and things like that, those things all count. And they wanted to know, basically, if bad things happened to you when you were a kid, would that mean you were more likely to be depressed, have addiction issues, eating disorders, low self-esteem, depression, suicide, ideation, and so on? And of course, they found out that, yes, the more bad things that do happen to you, the more likely it's going to affect you as an adult, which sounds really obvious now, but it wasn't obvious when they started looking into it. And they thought the thing that would be the most damaging would be sexual abuse. And it was incredibly damaging. If a child is sexually abused, it's massively destabilizing to them as adults. But the thing that they found out that came as the number one thing that really damaged young people as they grew into adults was what they called recurrent chronic humiliation. Can't say that properly. Or chronic recurrent humiliation, which is basically saying you're not okay, you're not acceptable, you're not good enough, and being told that over and over and over again, to the point where you can't be who you are naturally, where you're kind of, being hyper vigilant and hypersensitive and just constantly thinking, I'm not okay, I'm not good enough. That has really big impacts on people, and it makes people, when they're adults, more likely, and it's not everybody, because there's loads and loads of LGBT people who are incredibly happy and thriving and successful. Lots of us move through these feelings and problems and come out the other side, some more easily than others. But I think a lot of us as LGBT kids are told that we're not okay and made to feel that we're not good enough. It's a really, it's such a huge common thing for us. And I think when that manifests, when we get older, if we haven't known about that or dealt with it, it can lead us into a place where we kind of find lots of difficulties. And I think what happens is that when we come out, certainly my experience, it was like basically believing up until I was 16 that I had to be in the closet and it wasn't okay and I couldn't be who I wanted to be. And then suddenly you come out. So you go from being told by everyone around you that, oh, it's this terrible thing, to coming out and everyone's shoving gay magazines and boys and QX and poppers and God knows what else and saying, oh, great, let's come to Pride, razzle dazzle, put your crop top on and your sequins. So you go from one minute being told, I'm really, really bad, to I'm really, really amazing. It's quite hard to transition from those two polar opposites. And also, I think that so many of us go through that. When you come out into the gay scene, or just through other people, or onto Grindr now, as the experience of lots of young people now, not all of them, but a lot of those people, maybe possibly the majority of those people, have had the same experiences and are not feeling good enough, and suddenly need to come out. We haven't even had this discussion, people don't know what's going on, and so we're all looking for validation, and we're all so relieved, and some of that can be great. It's why, you know, all over the world, you know, the gay community is known for being like amazing partiers. We put on fantastic parties, we have an amazing time, we're very creative, we, you know, I know not everybody, it's a bit of a sweeping generalization, but we are responsible for lots of the amazing things that go on in the world culturally. But a lot of that for me was about, I need validation, and I need to get out of my head, because I still didn't feel very good about myself. I'd had that wound growing up and it hadn't been dealt with. And I think that, you know, when I was at school, we went to a Christian Union meeting and we asked a question, me and my friend, what would you say to people who are gay? And the guy said, I think you need counseling. And it's really ironic that, and actually, I think when we come out, I think we could all do with counseling, but not to make us straight, to make us actually feel okay with who we are, be it LGBTQ or whatever, however we may identify, to make it, to be affirmative to our sexuality or gender or expression or whatever it may be.
Yeah, of course.
So the drugs then becomes a big thing. And I think, of course, straight people use drugs, but I think that the crystal meth and G are really, really disproportionately used by gay and bisexual men in a sexual situation. And it comes to do with that thing. And if you're looking to kind of get off your face and not feel the feelings you have about yourself, and it's not always a conscious thing, because for me, it wasn't always like, oh, I hate myself. But it was about feeling very anxious and not feeling relaxed. And I constantly needed something to take the edge off that. And for me, it was mostly alcohol, but sex did that as well. And porn does that. And I think when those things, when there's so many men, and men are, you know, horny or whatever you want to, however you want to put it, sexual, there's nothing wrong with sex. There's nothing wrong with casual sex. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have sex. You know, you don't have to be Christian, monogamous, whatever it may be. But I think it can get into this energy where there's just a lot of kind of intense sexual behavior going on, and you know, sometimes it causes problems, sometimes it can be dangerous. And when drugs come into that mix, where people are using drugs to make themselves feel like porn stars and so on, and to have sex for days and days and days on end, as you see, I mean, I've lost so many friends to or people I've known, friends of friends, to you know, unintentional drug overdoses. There was an amazing young activist who I knew when I was younger, who was incredible, who died in a sexual situation from a heart attack because of drugs. And it's just, it's not about being judgmental, but I really wish he was still here. And I really wish there was a lot of people. I mean, there was someone I know that just died in the last couple of weeks, and I don't know the exact circumstances, but as I understand it, I think it was alcohol. And it's like, we know now, there are stats that show that we do have gay people are more likely to have a problem with alcohol or drugs. It doesn't mean everybody is, the vast majority don't. So it's really important to acknowledge that the vast majority don't, but we are more likely to, and it's not okay. It's not good enough, I think. I'm getting overexcited now, but it just really pisses me off that so many amazing, kind people that should still be here aren't here. And so that's kind of why I was motivated to write the book, and I still feel angry about it when I think about it, but there we are.
Yeah, I can understand that. I can see how painful it is for you to talk about that, so thank you for sharing that, Matt. You mentioned earlier on that someone was hurling abuse at you, that they said that you were going to die of AIDS. I remember my own experience from the 80s. I was terrified, and I lived in fear of HIV, phenomenal fear for many, many years, and it definitely had an impact on my development. Would you say that the prevalence of HIV had an impact on yours?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, just the jokes that, you know, at school, people would, I mean, it wasn't like everybody, and it's really difficult because sometimes I have not a warped perspective on it, but it's kind of, sometimes I can think, oh, it was all bad. And it wasn't all bad. There were lots of aspects of, you know, things I did in school plays and friends, and I've got still really good friends. Most of my best friends are still people I went to school with. But just that ongoing narrative of HIV and AIDS, and just the press constantly saying, I mean, I remember there was a cartoon in The Sun where they showed a man hanging his gay son, you know, and there was this, you know, at one point they did an editorial referring to gay people sharing their beds as gay terrorists. You know, this narrative that, you know, that basically AIDS was coming to kill the entire world because of gays. And so, you know, they weren't talking about the heterosexual people that could catch HIV. So we were just completely stigmatized, and we were just told constantly, you know, that being gay meant HIV and AIDS, and you were going to die of AIDS. And it just was, I mean, it was, yeah, I mean, I couldn't cope with that. It was completely, utterly overwhelming. And also, I think it's important to acknowledge as well that, you know, that has an effect on gay people, in the sense that I remember, you know, that lots of gay people aren't cool with people about HIV and AIDS. You know, I'm sure if people who are positive have, not everybody again, of course, but you hear a lot. I hear a lot from my friends who are positive that they have had experiences of people being horrible to them on dating apps, rejecting them. And there was a young guy I knew from Ireland who's been very open about posting, because he's open about his HIV status and he talks about it to educate people. He gets the most horrendous abuse about it on apps. I mean, I hope it's not all the time, but he has posted quite a lot of those messages. So we've all got the kind of journey of healing to go on, haven't we? I think.
Would you say that it's inevitable that if you grow up as a LGBT person in Western culture, that you will inevitably be damaged by the growing up and ultimately coming out process?
Well, I mean, I did a talk recently, and some younger people said it's really, really important that we acknowledge that, you know, the older generation went through a really hard time. I was like, thank you, I'm the older generation. But you know, we're really proud and we're really happy, and that is great. And clearly things are so much different now. I mean, on every level. I mean, I'm just writing another book at the moment, actually, and just touching on some stuff about the 80s, and just reminded about the kind of comedians who were there around at the time, like John Inman and Larry Grayson and Kenneth Williams, who we kind of thought were gay, but wasn't really said. So you didn't really know for sure. It wasn't certainly, well, they weren't able to be open about who they were in a full way. And down to Twitter, you know, like, I think it's an amazing thing that young people can see on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram that there are other LGBT people in the world. I didn't know that when I was a kid. I didn't know how many gay people there were. I thought there was like about 100 kind of like people that lived under a bridge that came out, you know, from the Thames once a year for Gay Pride, because the press made it sound like you were the only one. So I think it's an amazing thing that people are, you know, able to be visible. I think things are getting better in some schools, by no means all schools, but some schools that have anti-bullying policies and so on. I think lots of parents are more educated, the public are more educated, but there still is, as lots of people know, still huge amounts of, you know, homophobia and transphobia around. So I think it's still difficult. I think it's often down to your circumstances. I remember there was a young man that got in contact with me to say that he lives outside of a city in the UK, and he said it's common, you know, most days he'll get people spitting at him and referring to him as the local queer. So, you know, there still are problems. I do think there's more and more younger people having a better time, but I think someone at this thing I did the other day seemed to suggest that, you know, you see kind of younger people in bars and clubs having a great time. Well, the thing is, I was in bars and clubs having a great time. You know, I was on Gay Pride, waving the flag, looking really, really happy to the outside world. And I really hope those people are happy. I genuinely, my God, that's what we want. That's what we want, people to be able to feel okay in their skins. But I think, you know, we just need to be on the lookout for you know, issues around drugs or alcohol. If people have got a problem, if your friend has a problem, just so that we can have it in the culture, that we know about it, so that if someone does get into trouble, we can just talk to them about it and help them, point them in the right direction to a service, and try and be a bit more of a community, and understand that unfortunately this is something that affects our community at higher rates than the mainstream. But we can help each other out with that. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't have to end badly by any means.
I mean, what I love about listening to you, Matt, is I can relate. You talk about your childhood, your own experiences. It just sounds very similar to my own. And my work comes in a lot of contact with clients from Positive East. And for me, I had to go on this psychological journey, which I didn't even know I needed to go. And I thought I was all right. I got my own business and was successful, blah, blah. And I thought I was all right, but I really, really wasn't. And I think that it's that similar kind of realization that you need to change your own perception of yourself. I see a lot of clients in service, kind of you're in my age, who haven't been on this journey. They're still trapped, and they're still suffering from a lot of addiction and loneliness, and they don't have the social skills as adults to form any meaningful relationships, romantic or otherwise. What would you say to help them now?
Well, that's a good question. And it's a hard question to answer, because, you know, like, there isn't a kind of magic bullet. And I think it's an ongoing journey. You know, when I wrote Straight Jacket, And I said, actually, it came out in June 2016. It was my last issue as the editor of Attitude. And I said in that editor's letter, I'm going off to do some more work on myself. I've done loads of work on myself. There's still some way to go. You know, we're all a work in progress, I think. But for me, it was about, well, I think understanding it was a massive thing. I think being able to I was constantly like getting myself into difficult situations and constantly blaming other people. So rowing with friends, being very codependent, lots of codependent relationship with friends, and constantly being, oh, it's their fault, it's their fault, it's their fault. It was such a relief to acknowledge the problem. And I think, and to say, I do screw up sometimes, and I do cause problems sometimes, and I don't mean to, but that's what happens. And I think our culture, you know, like Instagram and Facebook culture, where here's me looking amazing, and my amazing chest and my body and my pictures on Grindr and me on holiday and I'm having the most amazing life. There's this culture where we're kind of encouraged to present the best side of our lives, and it's not realistic for anyone, because everybody has ups and downs. So I think being able to talk about the stuff is kind of counterintuitive. So being able to say, yeah, maybe I've got myself into a difficult position. Like I'm in recovery for drinking. I haven't had a drink for 6 years now. And one of the reasons why I found it really difficult going into recovery was because I thought, oh God, if you admit you've got a problem with drink, you're a loser. And, you know, you're like some tramp that sits in a kind of, the park, you know, drinking out of a paper bag. And that wasn't my experience. And I found it really, really hard. And I've had lots of friends, I know people over the years who need some to look at their drinking, but say, I can't do that because it means, that I'm a loser. And you're not a loser. You know, if you've got a drinking problem or a drug problem or a problem with any compulsive behavior, it's just mental health. So I think talking about it, and for me, I couldn't really do any deep work and therapy until I had stopped drinking. And that's not always the same for everybody, but I was drinking too much. I was drinking every day. So I had to get a bit of a clear head. And it's an ongoing journey. And sometimes people can, you know, get a bit obsessive about it. Like, oh, they're going to cut sugar out, or they're going to cut coffee out, and they're going to cut this out and cut that out. But I think it's about, ideally with a therapist or with people that are in recovery in some way, just working out what is it that's getting too much for you in your life. Is the shopping, you know, or gambling. You know, people do, sound silly, but people do get into this place of compulsive shopping, wasting money. I'm sure it's a thing that's coming up for a lot of people while we're in lockdown. We're in lockdown with Amazon. I mean, I just bought.
It's lethal.
Yeah, I mean, I've done this constant trail of stuff coming to my house, you know, from the Amazon guys. It's crazy. So it's not, and also it's important not to over pathologize it, because these are things that everybody does. You know, all humans do these things. You know, like there's that phrase, comfort eating. You know, we know that if you're not feeling good, like you see, watch Bridget Jones. She gets the cheesecake out and the chocolates out when she's, you know, not feeling very good and stuffs her face. But it's about when you're doing that too much, and when it's taking over, and when it's taking control of your life. And I think it's about looking out for those things. I think for me, having a real sense of community has been an amazing thing. To be honest with you, it's the only time I've found a real sense of community in the LGBT community is in recovery. We're going to go to lots of different specific LGBT recovery groups, and I don't just go to the LGBT ones, I go to the mainstream ones too, but it's really an important part of my life to be able to mix with LGBT people who are being not like I was and other people were in clubs where you're off your nut in a club, or you're completely drunk, or you're trying to stand there in the corner smoldering, trying to look, you know, really hyper masculine and trying to pick somebody up. We're in recovery where you're just being honest, and sometimes people cry, and sometimes people are really honest about what's going on for them and how they feel. And there's also lots of laughter. But there's an amazing sense of community that I have gotten. And I think I hear people talking about a lack of a sense of community these days. And in recovery, I have really found that. So ultimately, it's about having therapy and dealing with trauma. And some people don't need to do that. I've known people who have had, you know, a 6-week course of CBT counseling, and that's it, and they're off, and that's done, no problems, and they, you know, things go pretty well for them. For me, CBT therapy didn't really work, and I needed more. And, you know, sometimes people need to stop drinking, sometimes people need to stop taking drugs, sometimes people need to look at the sexual behavior, sometimes you need to do all of those things. It's different for everybody, but I think just starting to get in there and looking at that stuff is the kind of the first thing to do.
Great. Matt, you talk in your book about what makes somebody happy, and there's a saying that, you know, if you don't know where you're going, how will you know when you get there? You mentioned on the social media the portrayal, these Photoshop perfect lives that we all sadly aspire to. what would you say to makes somebody happy in life? What kind of this journey that you say that we're all on, what does the end of the journey look like?
Oh my goodness. Shall I start like chanting? I mean, that's a massive question, isn't it? Because it's different for everybody. I mean, it's different for everybody. I mean, for me, growing up, I felt so shit about myself. I thought I have to be a pop star. I mean, it's really ridiculous to say it out loud now. I'm in my mid 40s. That's what I thought. I thought I needed to be a really famous pop star, and like, you know, like being in the limousine and telling people that were nasty to me at school, oh, look at you now, look at me, I'm a pop star, because I felt so shit about myself. And a lot of the time, you know, through my 20s, a lot of that was what was driving me. And I think going into recovery, it's made me reevaluate so much. I mean, you hear in recovery, you hear people talking about their experience normally for 20 minutes at the beginning. And so many times you hear people saying things like, I used to be so off my, I mean, it's not me because drugs weren't really a big part of my story, but you hear people saying things like, I was on drugs so much, I wasn't there for my family. I wasn't there for my dad's birthday. I wasn't there when, I don't know, my auntie passed away, when she was in hospital and all the rest of my family were at her bed. You know, wasn't fulfilling all the kind of like family and friends relationships, missing friends' birthdays, forgetting all of that stuff, which makes you feel worse because you don't feel good about it. Even though you might go, oh no, I don't care, screw them. It does go in, and you do feel worse, and it kind of makes you feel worse, and it makes the problem and the need to kind of not feel those things kind of grow. So I think it's about, for me, it's been about reconnecting to who I am, and reconnecting to friends. You know, like I say, when I was younger, I thought I will only be happy when, you know, every single one of my friends is like, you know, like a famous pop star or, you know, an actor, and I'm in, you know, the posh restaurants all the time clinking, you know, martini drinks and being fabulous, bohemian. And actually my best friends are the people I went to school with. You know, like at the time, it's not like I didn't think they were good enough. I didn't think that at all, but I was always looking for more and more and more. And I realized those are the people that are always there for me. Those are the people that part with me in my worst times. Those are the people that stand by me. And since I've not been drinking, and since I've been trying to work on myself, I have a far better relationship with my mum and dad. You know, yes, they weren't perfect because they said homophobic things when I was growing up, but they didn't understand either. And they have felt really guilty about that. It's been a journey for them too, but I have a far better relationship with them. I can own up to the things that I have done wrong. I must have been a nightmare at times, but it wasn't my fault because, you know, I was growing up struggling, not being supported by the world. And just having a better relationship with everybody, really. And for me as well, I mean, if anyone follows me on Twitter or Instagram, I'm very conscious of the ecological problems we face. And for me, knowing the planet is in a really bad state, simple things are far more important to me now, like going for a walk in the park, you know, looking at the squirrels, you know, looking at, there's a cat, you know, loads of cats around where I live, and stopping and stroking them. Those are the things that actually give me satisfaction and make me feel happy. And it's not to say, you know, you don't want to have a successful career or a relationship, or people work on their bodies. It's not like any of those things are bad or wrong. They're not. But it's just about keeping things in proportion. Life is about life, you know, it's about love and, you know, being kind to yourself, liking yourself, being able to give love to other people in lots of different ways, and being able to accept it. And I think those are the key things that we need to be happy.
Yeah, I agree to that, Matt. Okay. Well, you're coming to the end of our time now, Matt. It's been great. But just before we finish, I'm trying to know about your career in attitude. Madonna, was she a total bitch or what?
No, Madonna, she was great, actually. I mean, when I saw, and I write in the book as well about the way that it's not just LGBT people, but I think people who've gone through not feeling good about themselves growing up can really latch on to those people that kind of say it's okay to be who you are. So for me, I was 16, it was the year I came out. So the first concert ever was Madonna. I didn't really understand who she was. My friend had a spare ticket, he took me, and I was completely obsessed with her. So for years, when I got to Attitude, I would be sending the magazine and begging letters to her publicist in America. And eventually we got to do an interview with her for Confessions on a Dance Floor album in 2005. And yeah, it was really cool. It was really amazing to meet her. I was very uncool and said, you know, I'm a huge fan and you've changed my life. And we were meant to have, I think, about 3/4 of an hour, but we went over, we had about an hour and a half, and she, you know, waved her manager away and said, oh, it's cool, we're getting on. So yeah, that was absolutely incredible. And yeah, it was a real kind of, it was an amazing time because I was there on and off through, like, from the mid 90s, in different positions at the magazine. But just to, when we did David Beckham on the cover, that was, a really big deal in 2002 to have Beckham, who was like, the captain of the English team at the time of the World Cup, saying, going from a place where basically heterosexual men were kind of told, that gay people were a threat, gay men were a threat, and if they fancied you, it's a terrible, terrible, awful thing. And actually, him being on the cover of Attitude saying, "Yeah, I'm really flattered if gay men find me attractive." I think that was an amazing thing. And then we had Tony Blair in 2005, the first prime minister to appear on the cover of Gay magazine. And then when I finished, we had Prince William on my last cover. And so I know that, like, I talk very much about this in the book. Some people like Attitude, some people don't. Some people are critical of it. And, I acknowledge the fact that we were putting lots of hot shirtless men on the cover of that magazine. And I had this ongoing kind of, difficulty with that, and trying to do other people and trying to put other people and trying to be more representative. And then, people not buying the magazine when you did that. So it's all these kind of complicated things. But I look back at that time, it was really exciting. I mean, hanging out with Madonna, it's quite nice, isn't it? Yeah. Quite nice. I mean, we used to work in a restaurant, so I mean, not there's anything wrong with working in a restaurant, but yeah, it was very. It was. I had to pinch myself that kind of was doing those things.
Yeah, it's just sounds like you had a very typically ordinary upbringing for your career to burgeon so fantastically. You must be very proud of yourself.
Oh, thanks. Well, that's that self-esteem thing, isn't it? You don't want to be going around going, look at me, but all the young people don't know who I am, so it's fine.
Okay, I think we'll leave it there. Matthew Todd, that was great. Good to see you, and we'll see you again in a few years' time.
Thank you for having me. Really nice to see you.
What's your new book called, Matt?
Don't know yet. Got about 4 or 5 different titles, so I don't know if it's any good. We'll have to see. Hopefully it'll be out next year, but we don't know. Okay, well, good luck with that. Thank you. Okay, for those of you that want to come backstage to have a little chat with Matt, we're in our Zoom room. This is available for service users only. So if you've applied, you should have your passwords and access codes. So we'll see you on Zoom. Thanks very much.